it's really hard figuring if someone is an expert at something or not. For example, human resources many times calls in technical people who are developers in order to interview other people who is trying to get a new role in the company. I'm going to explain you one of the main problems I see with this kind of processes, okay? Imagine, for example, that you are trying to hire someone for Oracle Entity Manager, which is a product from Oracle used for identity management and synchronization between different platforms. It's like not a single sign-on solution, but it also provides single sign-on functionality, you know? And the company is trying to hire an expert because they are having issues that their in-house people cannot solve, okay? Sometimes the allegation is that there is not enough time to solve them, but usually the problem is that there is not the appropriate knowledge, okay? So you basically take an interview with someone who says is an expert on Oracle Identity Manager, and during the interview, the workers start asking him questions. For example, think something like this in the left. Okay, we have candidate A. So there's a question like, do you know how roles are synchronized between Oracle Identity Manager and Active Directory? It's a question totally late from an interview, but the problem is that what the worker there is expecting is to be told what the documentation is telling about it. What am I talking about? I'm saying that the developer is asking that person whether he knows how the parameter is called in the adapter in order to connect, or some specific parameters to see if the person knows by memory, the candidate knows by memory these kind of things. The real expert never remembers these kind of things because this is in the documentation and you can always look it up. What is a real expert characterized by? Is characterized by the fact that he's able to deep dive into the real issues that are behind these concepts. No one really cares as a deep core expert, as a deep stack expert, how things are named or whether the process is called reconciliation or if the data structure that you use is called field map. The expert is worried about how to identify problems in a stack trace, how to be able to sniff the traffic to figure out what the problem is in the data that is interchanged, how to use a private key to decrypt the data when the communication is encrypted, how to interpret a stack trace when the stack trace is giving information that is not obvious to the non-expert. These kind of things are the ones that really should be looking up in an interview. You know, you should be looking at, for example, whether the person is good at analyzing stack traces within Oracle Identity Manager. So instead of asking generic questions that can be addressed with the documentation, try to ask questions that really show real knowledge about the solution. For example, instead of just doing this kind of thing, the best approach possible is something like this, you know. We had an issue with Oracle Identity Manager, we're trying to communicate with Active Directory, and we had this Java exception. What kind of information can you take out of it? Because this kind of thing is not in the documentation from the product, okay? Oracle is not going to tell you how to interpret the internal APIs from the product. It's not going to tell you what this part of the API is doing. Oracle is not going to tell you that most of the code internally in Oracle Identity Manager is based on open source. It's not going to talk you about the parsers, the interpreters, the serializing, deserializing. So basically what you're looking is for someone who is able to really read the guts of the product. Not that he's really going to the documentation and knowing obvious information to anyone with the ability to read. So, okay, what I will do is I will look at this specific line here, and then there is a serialization attempt because this person really understands how the object within the Java virtual machine is being put on the wire, and then probably there is a problem with the binding that is being done with the object. This kind of thing is telling you that the person is an expert. But in the other hand, the person who has read the documentation and knows how a parameter is called probably is just the kind of person that goes around reading on the internet. So the chances is he's gonna just throw the exception in Stack Overflow and figure out if something is already there. I know that because I address questions like this in Stack Overflow from time to time. You know, people telling you, hey, I know the concepts, but I don't know what really is happening behind the curtains. That's usually the problem. So if you want really real experts for products, don't look for the names that the product is giving to a specific concepts. Try to figure out whether that person really understands all the implications that are behind that situation, because usually the problem is that there are no real Java experts, so no one really cares about the specific simplicities that the product is given. The problem is that when you're trying to deep dive into the product, what you're finding is a lack of knowledge on how internally works in a WebLogic server or maybe a WebSphere server or Tomcat or whatever. That's usually the problem when it comes to real expertise. Thanks a lot.